Get over here! I should have killed you long ago.
Did everyone get some time to unwind after part 1? I hope so, because I'm about to uncover the wickedness of a timeless Nintendo character. I know what you're thinking. Bowser, right? Actually, despite Bowser Jr. being a bit of a spoiled brat, the Koopa King is always supportive of his son, teaching him how to be a villain, but also giving him the freedom to take on Mario his own way, what with all the gadgets. Plus, they're the only parent-child pair to both make it into Smash Brothers. Oh, sorry, Lucina. I guess Chrom would rather be a final Smash with his best friend than help out his own daughter! But no, the culprit here is Donkey Kong. The first. Though different sources have disagreed on the matter, it's widely accepted that Cranky Kong from Donkey Kong Country is the original 8-bit Donkey Kong, and that the DKC star is actually his grandson. Oh yes, we're widening the scope on this list now. Grandfathers are just as susceptible as fathers, though as you'll see, the patriarch of the Kong clan has some sins towards his own son to answer for as well. As a middle-aged Donkey Kong, Cranky was imprisoned as a sideshow attraction by Jumpman, later known as Mario. I can understand his need to escape, and maybe kidnapping Pauline and throwing barrels at Jumpman was a little justified, but eventually it gets DK recaptured. In comes Donkey Kong Jr., who has to travel all the way from the Congo jungle to break his papa out. And what does Gramp Gorilla do with his newfound freedom? He can't simply return to the jungle japes, no, he has to go picking fights with Stanley in the greenhouse in Donkey Kong 3, and even roping his son back in the Blood War for Donkey Kong 94 on the Game Boy. That's really only the tip of the coconut tree though. It's as an old mandrill that his corrupt sense of entitlement truly manifests. Fast forward to Donkey Kong Country 1, starring Donkey Kong III and his nephew Diddy Kong. Old Cranky is now too old to leave his rocking chair, so he gives advice to his grandson and great-grandnephew. These hints are interspersed with the usual old man ramblings of how the new video games are too fancy and too easy, how he could have done all of this better than you, and hitting his relatives with his cane. Well, he's grouchy from the Great Banana Shortage, so let's give him a pass. In Donkey Kong Country 2, King K. Rool has made things personal and kidnapped young Donkey Kong, so it's up to Diddy and newcomer Dixie to get him back. Cranky Kong reacts to his grandson's kidnapping and is now charging Diddy for his services. Yeah, you want advice? Go get some money, chump. I understand if you're too old and frail to get directly involved, but you're actually going to resist helping us get your grandson back? In Donkey Kong Country 3, King K. Rool now has Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong, so the extended family of Dixie and Kitty are now here to save the day. It's rough depending on the C team, but a distant cousin, Swanky Kong, has opened up a carnival game where you can try to win some extra lives. Your opponent? Cranky Kong. You selfish old man, you are now actually hindering me from rescuing your descendants. There's constant other incidents where Cranky shows his true colors. How about when you first meet him in Donkey Kong 64 and he refers to DK as his disappointing son? Wait, son? Guys, we give Professor Oak a hard time for forgetting his grandson's name, but Cranky Kong has no idea who he's even talking to. Well, there is a light at the end of this tunnel. In Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, Cranky Kong finally lends a hand as a partner and playable character. He's pretty acrobatic too, able to jump as well as Diddy and bounce on his cane. It's almost as if he was never... Wait. Cranky, in Country 2 you supported yourself with 2 canes. In Country 1, you couldn't even get out of your chair for a proper walking animation. Are you telling me you were faking it the whole time? You could have been bouncing around like Yoda, helping us out the whole time. This has been a lot of circumstantial evidence, I know, but let's clinch this case so we can report it to Child Services. Cranky, if this is your grandson, whatever happened to Donkey Kong Jr.? Where's your son, Cranky Kong? I guess after that last one, you think I'm not taking this seriously. Well, I am. But how seriously can you take a man who eats stone axes? Yeah, you all knew Heihachi Mishima would make the list. A man whose bad parenting is actually the inciting incident of the entire Tekken plotline. Funny thing is, most of these bad fathers have had bad fathers, or at least fathers who weren't around or died young. But Heihachi's dad, Jinpachi, was actually a great guy and really nurturing to both Heihachi and his son, Kazuya. Well, Heihachi wanted the company and was afraid Grandpa Jinpachi was spoiling Kazuya, so he staged a coup to have Jinpachi imprisoned. Heihachi fired his dad. And then he tried to teach Kazuya in the School of Hard Knocks, and when Kazuya couldn't meet his ridiculous standards, Heihachi threw him into a ravine, saying that if he's strong enough to be a Mishima, he'll be able to survive and climb his way out. Kazuya was 5! When young Kazuya was so desperate and angry, he made a deal with the devil, giving him the power to climb out and seek revenge. In Tekken 1, if you win the tournament as Kazuya, Kazuya will return the favor by throwing Heihachi into the same ravine. But Heihachi don't need no stinking devil gene to climb out of there. Heihachi enters the King of Iron Fist tournament and, not to be outdone, throws Kazuya into a volcano. Thus begins a sequence of increasingly cruel and increasingly ridiculous punishments inflicted on one another. But Heihachi's domestic homicide doesn't stop at his son. Like Cranky Kong, Heihachi proudly drinks from a world's worst grandfather mug thanks to his treatment of Jin Kazama. When Jin introduces himself as Kazuya's illegitimate son, Heihachi takes him in and teaches him the Mishima fighting style. Nice, right? Nope. He only wishes to use him and his inherited devil gene to lure out the Aztec god named Ogre in order to become all-powerful. And for good measure, in the ending of Tekken 3, he throws Jin out of a helicopter. Why are you so obsessed with throwing your descendants off of things? But nothing tops his ending in Tekken 5. After besting his son, his grandson, and his vengeful father, Heihachi blows millions of dollars to have the 3 of them chained to the outside of a rocket and launched into space. That is some serious devotion to hating your family. And it's not like Heihachi is any kind of saint otherwise. He screws over pretty much every man and woman in the series at one point or another, and he's so universally hated that the only person willing to tag team with him in Street Fighter X Tekken was Kuma, one of his trained fighting bears. But do you want to know something really wacky? In their ending, Kuma gets blasted with a magical energy that gives him eternal youth. And in the epilogue, it states that Heihachi planned to dissect Kuma to learn the secret of this magic, but gave up because he couldn't bring himself to kill Kuma. Couldn't do it! This man will throw his 5-year-old son off a cliff and fire his innocent grandson into space, but hurting a bear is just monstrous to him. That is simply incredible. Heihachi should have foregone kids and just bought a puppy. I didn't have a long introduction to this countdown, as you might remember, partly because I knew each entry would be long enough as is, but also because I felt the rules for my countdown would become apparent as we went on. But as we reach number 3, let's ask ourselves, what makes someone a father? From a biological standpoint, it's the direct male ancestor to the child, and from a symbolic standpoint, it's a man who raises a child and shapes their development into adulthood. All of the entries thus far have passed the first definition, even Big Boss whose children were cloned, but most come up short in the second department. Cervantes and Hatham were not around during their kids' childhood and just became major obstacles later. But for these next 2 entries, maybe the father was around too much. That brings us to Getz, one of the most unapologetically evil villains in the entire Pokemon franchise. And yes, he is N's adopted father. So biologically, no, he's not N's dad. But is he actually lying about that? Because how common is mint green hair? In any case though, adopted parents can be just as loving, competent, and supportive as birth parents, and Getz made sure he was always a part of N's life. Good, right? No. N was born into Team Plasma, and while his foster sisters Anthea and Concordia taught him how to read and eat right, Getz instilled his foster son with the adamant belief that Pokemon were being enslaved by mankind, and that Pokemon trainers, by nature, were wicked and cruel. As a child, N was left alone most of the time with injured and mistreated Pokemon, so that he would learn to distrust trainers. He forged a special bond with the woodland creatures, and as an adult became a cap-wearing Jesus figure who was completely in tune with all Pokemon. Getz then crowned him the King of Team Plasma. It's weird meeting N in-game, because while most of Team Plasma's grunts are as stupid and cruel as the worst of Team Rocket and Galactic, N is respectful, compassionate, and expresses a very valid opinion. Here's the problem. Getz thinks the entire moral stance is a load of trubbish. He doesn't care about the Pokemon. He doesn't care about whether they're better off free or growing alongside their trainers. All he cares about is that N can be a charismatic messiah that leads his cult to do Getz's bidding. Through this army of well-intentioned zealots, Getz is able to overtake the Elite Four and nearly enslave all of Unova. Compare this to Hatham, who for a large time didn't know he had a son, or Big Boss, who specifically didn't want children. Getz wanted a son just to further his own evil scheme, so he has one bred and raised to his exact specifications. In Pokemon Black and White, N really thinks he's in control, being the king and all, and he trusts his father's counsel to the very last. The only thing N does wrong by Getz is letting the player have one of the legendary dragons, since he's grown to recognize when a Pokemon and a trainer have a connection. But even to the last battle, N fights for Getz and only fully understands his folly when it's too late. If it weren't for the player character, Getz would have succeeded. Not that he ever thanks N for any of his hard work and trust. When N loses to the trainer and shows the slightest bit of respect for his opponent, Getz lashes out and decides that he will have his son banished from Unova during the new regime. Jeez man, if you're going to raise a puppet, you can at least not punish him when he does his job. Well, Getz fails and N goes off on a new spiritual journey, but both return for the epic conclusion of Black and White 2. Getz is now almost completely insane, and N riding in on either Zekrom or Reshiram, depending on which version of the game you play. Bonus points to Getz for actually trying to kill the player character. Like, seriously, he tells Kyurem to impale you on icicles. Giovanni wouldn't have done that. When N intervenes, Getz does pretty much the most uncool thing ever. He steals N's dragon to power up Kyurem. Getz, I don't know who the hell you think you are, but you do not take another man's dragon. A few smaller things before we wrap up Getz here. N's full name is Natural Harmonia Gropius. Way to name your kid, Green Top. Also, his son is severely lacking in social skills since his best role model was probably a Darmanitan. He would have been the weird kid at school. Like, he's a good guy and everything, but he keeps asking me to ride the Ferris wheel and it's making me uncomfortable. But the worst thing about Getz is that he takes an interesting character like N and steals the spotlight from him. Think about if you were N, raised your whole life thinking the world was, well, black and white. And from the day you were born, you were told all of the great things you were going to do and how this day, at the Unova Pokemon League, you were going to change the world for the better because you were the chosen one. This is built up to the best day of your entire life, and your father, who you've worked so hard to honor, pushes you out of the way, insults you for being weak, and threatens to have you thrown out of the country. I think you'd be pretty upset. So Getz adopted his son to seek world domination. That's pretty bad, but Manfred von Karma adopted his son just to make him miserable. Where do I start with this guy? Prosecutors in the Ace Attorney franchise can be pretty corrupt, but Von Karma takes it to a whole new level. He intimidates judges, he hides evidence, he even once tasered Phoenix and Maya just to protect his perfect record of courtroom victories. Enter Gregory Edgeworth, a defense attorney who loses a case to Von Karma, but during the trial actually proves that Von Karma blackmailed the plaintiff to confess to his crime, earning Von Karma a penalty on his record as a lawyer. This, to Von Karma, ruins everything he has ever worked for. While storming about in the hallway, Von Karma happens to hear three men stuck in an elevator: Gregory Edgeworth, his boy Miles, and a bailiff named Yanni Yogi. After being stuck for 5 hours, Yogi went into a panic and began attacking Gregory, and young Miles, hoping to make Yogi stop, found his gun on the floor and threw it in his general direction. The gun discharged, passing through a wall and hitting Von Karma in the shoulder. Already mad about the penalty, this bullet sent Von Karma over the edge, and he would literally hold on to that pain 15 years later. When the elevator finally opened, all three inside were passed out from the shock of the situation. Von Karma took Yogi's gun, shot Gregory through the heart, and left the crime scene. Not only was Gregory now dead, Miles had to live the rest of his life thinking that he was the one who accidentally killed his own father. So overall, that's a bad man. But is he a bad father? Well, with the bullet wound marring his perfect skin, Manfred continued his vengeance by adopting the now orphaned Edgeworth and ensured that never again would he know a moment of love or positive reinforcement. On the plus side, he also mentored Edgeworth into a great prosecutor. That sounds nice until you realize the endgame. 15 years later, 15 15 years later, when Edgeworth is now possibly the second most renowned prosecutor around, Von Karma sets up the perfect crime, framing Edgeworth for the murder of Robert Hammond, the attorney who got Yanni Yogi acquitted for his involvement in Gregory Edgeworth's death. And it's the perfect setup too. Both on a boat, in the middle of the lake, seemingly no one else around, Edgeworth holding the gun. How he managed this is just too complex to describe, and Manfred himself serves as the prosecutor against Edgeworth. Okay, I know the process of judicial review can be a little ethereal in this series, but how is it legal to prosecute your own son? Von Karma takes every bit of pleasure in presenting the case against his son and protege, and if not for the desperate efforts of Phoenix Wright, Miles Edgeworth would spend the rest of his life in prison, still thinking he killed his birth father. So let's lay all of this out. Manfred von Karma kills Edgeworth's dad, lets Edgeworth think he did it, adopts him, is mean and unloving, helps him become a great attorney just so he can know great success, waits 15 years for the big fall, frames him for a murder, and personally demeans him in the same courtroom where Edgeworth has seen so much triumph, just because Edgeworth's dad got him a tiny penalty that he completely deserved. And yeah, a bullet wound, but that was a complete accident. This isn't even considering Franziska von Karma. Yeah, Manfred has a biological daughter of his own, whom he completely shuns because he's too busy focusing on his 15-year revenge scheme. So Franziska has to do all of the work to follow in her father's footsteps, which she actually is really good at, and Manfred won't even give her a second glance. Wow, this guy just ruins life for everyone. Guys, I really think adopting a child is a noble deed and incredibly rewarding, but just don't do it like this. The hardest part of this list was determining what order to put them in. I think when it comes to raising a child, all sins are essentially equal. Apathy, manipulation, extortion, distance, condescension, brutality, malevolence, psychological abuse, physical violence. Whichever ones you find more egregious is a matter of personal distaste. So choosing a number one was tough. But this patriarch has a little bit of everything and manages to be the least responsible parent I can think of in video games or out. I'll just let one of his sons introduce him.
Zeus! Your son has returned.
The Greek god of thunder and sky, the king of Olympus and all other gods, the most powerful influence in the world of God of War. Now, quick clarification. I never use characters that do not originate from video games. Zeus is a Greek mythological figure, but like Amateras or the cast of Dynasty Warriors, I find that this game series creates its own interpretation and, by extension, its own unique character, so I'm going to allow it. But that does mean I can only consider evidence from the games, not any Greek mythology that isn't incorporated into God of War. Believe me, if I used all of the Greek literary canon, this would get even worse. But the games still give me a hell of a lot to work with. Zeus was the god who ended the age of the Titans by defeating his father Kronos, thus bringing on a new age where gods rule the planet. He had a number of children with his wife and sister Hera. To the gods, incest isn't really a problem, so try to ignore that. Zeus's children amongst the gods include Athena, Ares, Apollo, Artemis, Hephaestus, Hermes, and Persephone. And that's just among the gods. Zeus was a notorious player and had children with mortals that stretches his family tree into the hundreds. These illegitimate demigods include Hercules, Perseus, Pirithous, Deimos, and of course the ghost of Sparta himself, Kratos. It should be noted that there was a Kratos in real Greek mythology, but that Kratos has nothing to do with the protagonist of this game. In God of War, Ares has grown tired of Zeus favoring his sister Athena over himself and, in a desperate attempt to impress his unloving father, lays waste to Athens. Rather than talking it out, Zeus and the other gods conspire to help Kratos kill the God of War. At this point, Kratos had a bone to pick with Ares already. Ares had inflicted an uncontrollable rage on Kratos which caused him to inadvertently kill his own wife and daughter. Yeah, Kratos isn't winning any world's best father competitions either. So Zeus, with the other gods, secretly helps his one son kill his other son while claiming to have no part in it. And for helping to save Athens, Zeus and the Olympians reward Kratos by forgiving him for the murder of his family. Forgiving him? Well, gee, thanks, but it's your own fault Kratos did it anyway. And Kratos still has nightmares and torment over it. Don't you have any way to do something about that? Athena at least is a little nicer and lets him be the new god of war. But there's a bit of a side effect to Kratos' campaign against Ares. In order to slay Ares, Kratos opened Pandora's box, which spread evils across the pantheon. Specifically for Zeus, he is afflicted with fear. The fear that Kratos will eventually slay him and take the throne the same way Zeus took the throne from his own father Kronos, and Kronos took it from his own father. So to stop Kratos, Zeus secretly strips Kratos of his powers and gets him thrown into the underworld. Zeus, buddy, Kratos doesn't want the throne. He's going to kill you because you keep screwing him over. So yeah, maybe you could say that it's the evils of Pandora's box that make Zeus do all these things. Everyone has an excuse. Oh, an evil sword made me do it. I was possessed by an ancient god. My friend cloned me. I had nothing to do with it. Well, that doesn't work for two reasons. One, Zeus was already manipulating and extorting Kratos before he opened Pandora's box. And two, while the box's fear might possibly explain your treatment of Kratos, that doesn't mean you were a better father to any of your other kids. Let's go down the list here. Hermes, brutally killed by Kratos while trying to distract him from destroying all of Olympus. Ares, killed by Kratos knowing that his father never loved him as much as his sister Athena. Athena jumps in front of Kratos' blades and takes a lethal strike for Zeus. And ironically, it's Kratos who is heartbroken about this. Zeus barely even cares about his supposed favorite daughter. Hercules, he's killed his family due to a rage spell just like Kratos, only Hercules was afflicted by Hera, Zeus' own wife. So in this case, a squabble between Zeus and his wife gets taken out on Hercules and his family. And did you ever stop to consider, Zeus, that these are your grandchildren that Kratos and Hercules were possessed into slaughtering? Maybe you want to get involved in that? But I guess if Zeus started counting his grandchildren, that would just be too complicated. Then Hercules has to perform 12 trials to be forgiven for something that wasn't his fault, including cleaning out a giant poop-filled stable, and then Zeus makes Hercules defend him from Kratos, which of course means Hercules dies. Zeus loves pitting brother against brother. Perseus is kind of a funny case, because in traditional Greek myth, he's famous for beheading Medusa, but in God of War 1, Kratos already did that, so we're not entirely sure what Perseus does other than get trapped for eternity by the Sisters of Fate. Deimos? Taken away by Thanatos. Pirithous? We find him trapped in the underworld, also the work of Thanatos. Zeus, you are the king of Olympus! Is there really nothing you can say to the sisters and Thanatos to make them consider releasing your innocent kids? Apollo? We never see him in-game, but Pirithous has his bow in the cell of the underworld, so I'm guessing things didn't go well for the god of music. Artemis? She was sick of all this garbage, gave Kratos a cool blade, and fled Olympus entirely. Hephaestus? Well, Zeus was so worried about Hephaestus' daughter Pandora, and he senselessly beat Hephaestus until he looked like a Picasso painting and threw him into the underworld. And Persephone? Zeus' brother Hades kidnapped her, and she becomes the antagonist in Chains of Olympus, where she very nearly destroys the world before Kratos stops her, another situation in which Zeus, who's supposed to be in charge of this crap, takes no part whatsoever. They say that the morality of the gods is incomprehensible to us mere mortals, and that it's the flaws of the Greek gods that make them so captivating to study millennia later. Well, Zeus, even compared to your mythological counterpart, you are a monster! Your parenting is bad, and you should feel bad. And not only did you fail as a father to these countless offspring, you failed as the patriarch of Olympus entirely. If there's one possible saving grace, it's that Kratos, even though he in turn was a monster and at least partially responsible for what happened to his daughter, is still undeniably awesome. And that's the interesting thing I find as I close out this countdown. The relationship one has with their father can have a drastic impact on who someone grows up to be, but some of the kids from these 10 fathers actually end up being truly great. Solid Snake is one of the greatest video game heroes of all time. Edgeworth is an investigator of unparalleled intellect. Heck, I'll even admit Tidus was pretty valiant when it came to saving Spira. Maybe you get a mass murderer like Kratos or a confused youth like N, but many people can draw strength from their difficult upbringing, or overcome it and find themselves somewhere else. Not everybody is lucky enough to have a father in the picture, or might even have a pretty terrible one. But that doesn't have to seal your fate the way it does for Kratos. And if you happen to have a parent in your life who doesn't exhibit the qualities of these 10, maybe that might be a rarer treasure than you give him credit for. I'm the Green Scorpion, and I have a Papa Scorpion who deserves a hug. See you guys next time.